I was elbow deep in a box of donated books when my phone rang. I almost didn't answer. It was a Tuesday afternoon in February, and the school library where I volunteered every week after my shift at the clinic was cold in that particular way. Old buildings get cold in Ontario winters. The kind that settles into the floor and stays there no matter how high you turn the heat. I had my coat on. I had my gloves on. My fingers were stiff and I was trying to stack a pile of battered Hardy Boys paperbacks that kept sliding off each other, and honestly I just wanted to finish the job and get home. But I saw the number. It was a law firm in Kingston. I picked up. The man on the other end introduced himself as a solicitor. He said my grandmother's name. He said my grandfather's name. He said the words estate and sole beneficiary and appointment, at your earliest convenience, and I remember standing very still in the middle of that library, with a Hardy Boys book in one hand and my phone in the other, and the world just kind of going quiet around me. My grandparents had died 11 days earlier, a highway collision on the 401, in a snowstorm, coming back from their place in Prince Edward County. I had already cried everything I had. I had already sat through the service at the United Church in Napanee, where my grandmother had attended for 60 years, already eaten casseroles in the church hall, already driven home to my apartment in Ottawa, and sat in my kitchen for a long time not knowing what to do with myself. I had not been expecting a phone call from a solicitor. I said, "Okay," I said, "I'll come. Let me tell you about my grandparents first, because they're the ones who made everything possible, and they deserve to be understood before anything else does." My grandmother, I called her Gran, came to Canada from Scotland when she was 19. She worked as a bookkeeper. She was meticulous with numbers in a way that was almost frightening, the kind of person who balanced her checkbook to the penny and kept every receipt in a little accordion folder sorted by month. My grandfather was a contractor. He built things, houses, additions, commercial properties around the Kingston area. And he was good at it, and he was careful, and over 50 years of working and saving and investing modestly and never once living beyond their means, they had quietly accumulated something that no one in our family had any idea about. They lived in a brick bungalow on a county road outside Napanee. They drove sensible cars. Gran bought fabric at end-of-season sales and sewed her own curtains. My grandfather made his own wine in the basement and gave bottles to the neighbors at Christmas. They were not people who talked about money. They were not people who performed their lives. They were, however, the people who showed up. When I was 12 and my parents were fighting constantly and the house felt like walking on broken glass, it was my grandparents who would have me for the weekends. Gran taught me to make pie crust, cold butter, don't overwork it, and my grandfather taught me to read a level and drove me around in his truck, pointing out buildings he'd worked on. When I got into the nursing program at Queen's, it was Gran who mailed me a card with a check for $500 tucked inside, and a note in her small, careful handwriting that said, "This is for textbooks, not groceries. We'll handle groceries when you visit." When I graduated, they were the ones who drove 3 hours to be in the audience. My parents were not there. They had a scheduling conflict. I don't remember what it was. I'm the second of 2 children. My brother, older by 4 years, is the one my parents have always oriented toward. He's in finance in Toronto. He went to Western. He wears the right things, and says the right things, and has a beautiful detached house in Etobicoke, and a wife who organizes charity galas. My parents have pictures of his house on their phone. They show them to people at dinner parties. I'm a registered nurse. I work in a walk-in clinic in the Glebe neighborhood in Ottawa. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Hintonburg that I split with a roommate named Cece, because Ottawa rents are brutal, and nursing salaries are not what people assume they are. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door. I volunteer at the school library on Tuesdays. I have a second-hand couch that I love unreasonably, and a window box where I grow herbs in the summer. My parents have never visited my apartment. They've been to Ottawa twice in the 5 years I've lived here, once for a work conference my father attended, once to see my brother who was in town for a weekend. Both times we met for dinner at a restaurant downtown. Both times my mother asked how the job search was going, meaning, when was I going to do something more serious with my life? The job search. I've been a nurse for 7 years. I am not searching for a job. I don't say this to be bitter. I say it because it matters for what came next. It matters because it explains why my grandparents did what they did, and why I think they were right to do it. The solicitor's office was on Princess Street in Kingston, in one of those old stone buildings that make you feel like you're conducting serious business just by walking through the door. I drove down on a Thursday morning. I wore my good coat and a blouse I'd ironed the night before, which is not something I do regularly, and I sat across from a man with silver-framed glasses who laid out the documents on his desk in a neat row. My grandparents had updated their will 18 months before they died. The will was clear, witnessed, notarized, and entirely unambiguous. Everything. The property in Prince Edward County, the investments, the cash savings, the house on the county road. Everything went to me. The estate totaled just over $2.3 million. I sat with that number for what felt like a long time. The solicitor was patient. He had probably done this before. I asked if I'd read that correctly. He said yes. I said, why me? I knew why in my heart, but I needed someone official to say it out loud. He showed me a letter my grandparents had left with the will. Gran had written it. Her handwriting was very small and very even, the way it always was. She wrote that they had watched both of their grandchildren grow up and they were proud of both of us. She wrote that my brother was capable and doing well, and had more resources than he perhaps recognized. She wrote that they had watched me work hard for a long time, without asking for anything from anyone. And that they wanted me to have the freedom to keep doing what I loved, or to do something different, or simply to stop worrying about whether the car needed new brakes. She wrote that they hoped I would be happy. She signed it Gran and Grandpa with all our love. I sat in that Kingston office and cried in front of a solicitor I had just met, and I was not even embarrassed about it. I told no one right away. I needed time to understand what I was holding. I drove back to Ottawa that afternoon, and I went to my shift the next morning, and I came home and sat on my second-hand couch and thought about it. I thought about it for 4 days. I called the solicitor twice, with questions. I made notes in a notebook. On the 5th day, I called my parents. I should have known, I think, from the first 30 seconds of that conversation. My mother answered and I said I had something important to tell her, and before I'd finished the sentence she'd already said, "Oh, about the estate?" And her voice had a particular brightness in it that I didn't recognize at first, but later understood completely. She already knew. My brother had already spoken to someone. There had apparently been a conversation. I told them about the will. I told them about the amount. I tried to be straightforward about it because I thought that was the right thing to do. My father went very quiet for a moment. Then he said that he thought we should talk about this as a family. He said that Gran and Grandpa would have wanted things to be fair. He said that he and my mother had certain financial commitments they were managing, and that he assumed I understood how complicated things could get with estates, and that really the sensible thing would be for me to speak with my brother's financial advisor before making any decisions. His financial advisor. My mother said she was sure I didn't mean to be difficult about this. I hadn't said anything yet, except that I'd inherited everything. I said I'd think about it. I got off the phone. I sat on my couch again for a long time. They called back the next morning. My brother was on the call this time. He had a number in mind. I won't say what it was, but it was not small, and he framed it as a loan. And then when I said no, he reframed it as my parents' share. And when I said no again, my father said some things I don't want to repeat here. The call ended when I said I needed to go and I put down the phone. My hands were shaking. I'm not someone who shakes easily. I've worked emergency triage. I've held people's hands while I gave them bad news. I know how to stay level, but this was my family. And something about hearing my father's voice say the things he said, something about the flatness of it, the matter-of-factness of the entitlement, went through me in a way that I wasn't prepared for. I called my closest friend from nursing school, a woman named Bex, who now works in a hospital in Hamilton. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is why she's been my closest friend for 11 years. When I finished, she said, "Okay, first thing, don't make any decisions while your hands are still shaking. Second thing, you need an estate lawyer who is yours, not the family's." She was right about both things. I found a lawyer in Ottawa, a woman who had been recommended by one of the physicians at the clinic, and I met with her the following week. She was direct in a way I appreciated, and she went through everything with me carefully. The will was solid. There was nothing to contest. My grandparents had been thorough. There were a few things I hadn't known. My father had borrowed money from my grandparents twice. The first time, about 8 years ago, was a significant amount, more than $100,000, to cover losses from a business venture that hadn't worked out. He had signed a promissory note. It had not been repaid. The second loan was smaller, about $30,000, taken 3 years ago, also not repaid. Both notes were part of the estate, which meant they were now, in effect, my father's debts to me. I also learned that the county house, the one my grandparents had lived in, the one I grew up visiting, had my father listed as a secondary name on an older property document from the 90s, something he had apparently brought up in conversations with my grandparents over the years, in the context of eventually inheriting. My grandparents had quietly and legally resolved that issue when they updated the will. My lawyer explained the whole thing to me clearly. My father had no legal claim to anything. I sat with all of that for a while. I didn't go looking for ways to use it against him. I want to be clear about that. I just needed to know what was real. I needed to know what the actual ground was under my feet. 2 weeks after the call with my father and my brother, my mother drove to Ottawa. I didn't know she was coming. She didn't call ahead. I was home on a Saturday morning eating toast and reading a novel when I heard the buzzer from downstairs. I looked at the intercom camera, and there she was, in her good coat, standing in the snow outside my building. I let her in. She came upstairs and sat at my kitchen table, and looked around my apartment in a way that was almost curious. Like she was seeing it for the first time, which, in a way, she was. She didn't say anything about it. She accepted a cup of tea. She said she wasn't there. She said she just wanted to talk. What followed was about an hour of conversation that I found genuinely painful. She talked about what she and my father were dealing with. Some of it I'd known about, some I hadn't. She talked about my brother's mortgage situation. She talked about the cost of things in a general way that was meant to be sympathetic, but felt like accounting. And then she said, in a very reasonable voice, that she thought I should think about what family means and what Gran and Grandpa would have really wanted. I asked her what she thought Gran would have wanted. She said she thought Gran would have wanted everyone to be taken care of. I said I thought Gran had in fact been very specific about who she wanted taken care of. I said I thought the letter in the will was fairly clear. I said it gently. I tried to say it gently. My mother's face did something complicated. She said I was being self-righteous. She said she didn't know where I'd gotten this attitude from. She said she hoped I understood what I was choosing. She left about 20 minutes later. She didn't finish her tea. After she left, I sat very still in my apartment for a long time. The snow outside the kitchen window was that particular flat gray-white that February afternoons get in Ottawa, everything muffled and uniform. Cece was at her boyfriend's place. The apartment was quiet. I thought about my grandmother. I thought about what she had said in the letter. The freedom to keep doing what you loved, or to do something different, or simply to stop worrying about whether the car needed new brakes. I thought about what it must have taken for two people who never talked about money to sit down with a solicitor and be that precise, that deliberate, about protecting something they had built over 50 years. They had known. They had watched my family long enough to understand exactly what would happen, and they had prepared for it. I decided I was going to honor that. Things did not resolve quickly or cleanly. That's not how things work. And I want to be honest about that, because I think these stories sometimes get flattened into something neater than real life is. My father called several more times over the following month. Some of the calls were argumentative. One was briefly, something like an apology, though it circled back into recrimination within a few minutes. My brother sent me a long email that I read twice and then filed without responding to. My mother sent a card that said she hoped we could move past this. I wrote back briefly. I kept the card. I kept going to work. I kept doing my Tuesday shift at the school library. I ate dinner with Bex when she came through Ottawa in March. I had several more meetings with my lawyer and with a financial advisor she recommended. A careful, practical woman who helped me understand what I actually had and what made sense to do with it. The promissory notes were handled through legal channels. My lawyer sent the appropriate documentation to my father. It was not a comfortable process, but it was a real debt, properly documented, and my grandparents' estate had a right to it, and so did I. My father repaid it over 8 months, in installments, and we did not speak during most of that time. My grandmother's jewelry. Pieces that my grandparents had mentioned in a separate section of the will, pieces meant for me, had already been removed from the house at some point, before I could take possession of it. I don't know exactly when. I found out when I went to the county house for the first time after the estate was settled, and opened the old jewelry box in the bedroom, that was sitting empty on the dresser. My lawyer advised me on my options. I made a decision about how I wanted to handle it, and I'll say only that it was documented, it was formal, and the pieces were eventually returned. Some things are not worth the cost of the fight, but some things are, and what my grandmother had intended for me was worth it. The county property. This is the part I didn't expect to be as hard as it was. The house is a white farmhouse on about 12 acres outside Bloomfield, in Prince Edward County. My grandparents had bought it years ago as a summer place, and eventually spent more and more time there as they got older. There's a kitchen garden that my grandfather had expanded every year. There are apple trees along the south side of the property. There is a screened porch that faces west, and catches the evening light in a particular way in August, that I have no adequate words for. I drove out there in late April, after the estate had fully settled, with the keys in my pocket and no particular plan. I sat on the screened porch for a long time. I thought about my grandfather showing me how to stake tomato plants, and my grandmother making coffee in the old percolator that took forever, and the way the county smelled in summer. That particular green water light smell that I had been trying to describe to people from cities my whole life. I thought about what I was going to do. I want to be transparent about what I decided, because I think it says something important about what my grandparents were actually trying to give me. Which was not just money, but the freedom to make choices that matched who I was. I kept working. I am still a nurse. That is not going to change. I used part of the inheritance to pay off my student loans. I had about $42,000 left from nursing school. I bought a small condo in Hintonburg, a place that is mine, with good light and a second bedroom that I have turned into a proper reading room. Cece helped me move. We ate pizza on the floor surrounded by boxes, and it was one of the happier evenings I can remember. I set up a fund. I'm not going to give it a grand name because it isn't grand. It's a targeted, practical thing, in partnership with a school board contact I'd made through the library. The idea is simple. There are kids in underfunded schools who don't have access to basic supplies, tutoring support, books, that kind of thing. My grandparents believed in education the way some people believe in faith. Gran had done the books for a small school board organization for years as a volunteer. I thought they would have liked it. The county house I kept. I spend time there when I can. I've been learning to maintain the kitchen garden, which is more work than I expected and also more satisfying. The apple trees produced well last fall. I made applesauce that I gave away to half my building. I see my parents occasionally. It is not easy, and I don't pretend that it is. The relationship has changed in ways that I think are probably permanent. My brother and I exchange texts a few times a year, birthdays, Christmas, and there is a careful neutrality to it that I have accepted. I don't know what the future looks like. I know what the present looks like, and the present is something I can work with. What I keep coming back to, when I think about all of it, is something Gran wrote in that letter. She wrote, "We hope you will be happy, not successful, not comfortable, not secure." Though she would have wished all of those things too, happy. I think about what it took for two people, neither of whom had an easy start. To spend 50 years building something careful and real, and then to look at the people around them. Honestly enough to know where it should go. I think about my grandfather driving me around in his truck, pointing out the buildings he'd worked on. Not to brag about them, but because he loved the work. Because making real things for real people was the thing that had given his life its shape. I'm not them. I don't pretend to be. But I have tried to do something with what they gave me that would make sense to them. That would have made Gran nod, once, in that particular way she had, before she went back to whatever she was doing. That feels like enough. Most days, that genuinely feels like enough. And on the Tuesdays when I'm in that school library. Still cold, still drafty, still with the Hardy Boys sliding off their pile, I feel something that I think is the closest I've ever gotten to understanding what my grandparents were. People who showed up. People who built things that lasted. I'm trying to learn how.